Well, today on the Resilient Biome podcast, I'd like to welcome our guest, Carrie McGuckin. And Carrie is the sales director at Evivo. And we're going to be talking about a probiotic. Seems like everybody is taking some sort of probiotic today. But the one we're going to hear about through Carrie, I think, is the most exciting probiotic. So I'm really glad you're with us today, Carrie. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. I'm super excited to be here. This is very new to me and exciting, but it's gonna be great.
Fantastic. I think our guests are really going to enjoy what we're going to talk about here. Well, if you would, first of all, please describe your role at Evivo and how your background before Evivo helped prepare you for this position.
Yeah, so I've been with Evivo since 2018, and I manage the sales and more importantly, do the education component to providers who recommend our product and to parents and lactation consultants, really diving into the science behind what Evivo does, what this probiotic does, and how it works. Prior to that, I was a NICU nurse. I was at the bedside for about 10 years. Learned about Evivo actually through a patient's dad who asked me, what do I know about probiotics? And I laugh at myself now because I said, oh, it's good bacteria. Duh. And I've since been very humbled with exactly what a probiotic is. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoy what I get to do. I get to meet people every day and educate them on things that they can do to empower their microbiome and get it into a state that is beneficial for them, particularly in infants, which all the babies I love them. So
Yeah, it sounds like no shame in not fully understanding probiotics then, in terms of the rapid increase in our knowledge of gut health, that was like two lifetimes ago, 10 years ago. So much has changed. So then you said it was a father of one of the babies mentioned that. So that was not a product that your NICU was using right then. Were you using any probiotics? Did the docs recommend them?
yes, we were using a different probiotic at the time. It was an L. reuteri strain, and Evivo is a B. infantis. And I didn't know this back in the day. I thought literally a probiotic was a probiotic. So there's two different strains, two completely different families of bacteria. But this father, the baby, was particularly sick, so we had a lot of time to talk. The baby is now, I think, almost 5 or 6 now. He's doing great. So
Wonderful.
he's on the other side. But this particular dad was an infectious disease doctor, so he knew a lot about bacteria. And so I thought it was really funny that he was asking me about probiotics because I felt like he should be the expert in all bacteria, good or bad. But he mentioned it and he said, this bacteria, this strain is being, it could have the potential to have amazing benefits for babies, like reduced inflammatory conditions, asthma, allergies. This is what he was saying. And I said, that's amazing, And at the time I was going through my own son, who was extremely colicky. I had tried all sorts of over-the-counter products. Nothing truly worked. And so as we're talking about this, I went home and I did my research. I Googled what this particular bacteria he was talking about was, and I read an article and I thought, my gosh, this is pretty sound science of what this bacteria does partnered with baby's food source, which is breast milk. And I remember I turned to my husband, I'm like, we need this for our son because he's going through issues as well. So from that moment, we got our hands on Evivo and gave it to my son, who was experiencing extreme constipation. I mean, extreme. Recommended to have a capsule of Miralax a day to get him to pass the bowel movement, and he still wouldn't stool. It was about 10 to 14 days between each bowel movement. So I stopped the Miralax, gave Evivo on day 2. He passed a bowel movement. It was very painful for him to do so. So at that first bowel movement that he had with Evivo was still that painful experience for him, but it wasn't as bad. And then 2 days later, he's running around in the playroom, and it was like, what's that smell, which every parent knows happens with a baby. But we hadn't experienced that with my son because he always let us know that he was stooling, and because he would scream. And after 4 days on Evivo, he started stooling spontaneously. So I was like, I'm sold. This is night and day. And it was the only thing that regulated him, that got rid of his fear and his pain and made him regular, which was awesome.
That's a great story. And it seems like, so much research, so many job changes come about from a personal story. So that says a lot about why you're at Evivo. Did you make use of the L-reuteri at all? Did you give that to your son?
I tried that. Yep. And
Okay.
it
Did,
did,
did
it just, I didn't see a difference. And that's, I think probiotics in general, everyone takes them, they're like, I think it works. But when you give the right strain with the right food source, it's amazing what you'll see, because you're pairing the right food with the right bacteria at the right time, and you're having this amazing outcome. So for me, that was night and day.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to be talking a little bit about testing guts and even on infants. And even though you weren't able to peer in and have an actual report back from a gut test result, it didn't matter because your son was radically improved. And at the end of the day, that's all moms care about. You as a nurse, you as a science person, that's of interest to you. But at that point, that was all that's mattered, right?
Right. And I find that kind of across the board, where everybody, not everybody, but most people looking at probiotics for their infant are looking for symptomatic relief or prevention of, reflux or colic and things like that. What we know now with Evivo, EBC001, that strain, just the lowering of inflammation, the reduction of pathogenic bacteria, you're setting, not only are you getting reduction in the symptomatic things that are happening, but you're setting your baby up to develop in a state of homeostasis rather than the state of inflammation that can manifest as diaper rash and colic and things like that. So it's kind of, you get the symptomatic instant relief, and as a new mom, that's amazing. But then what we're really starting to understand is that long-term benefit that these babies can get.
Yeah, would you please expand upon that? I've read so much prevents, greatly reduces chance of asthma, et cetera. If you could just share whatever you want about that.
Yeah, so really it's the inflammation is the way I look at it.
Hmm.
So inflammation can be viewed as the root cause of all disease processes, because it's not a good situation. Your body should be developing in a state of homeostasis. And when you look at the newborn or infant, they come out, their immune system is still developing. They're exposed to so much. They're supposed to have breast milk paired with this particular bacteria. What's happening, unfortunately, is this bacteria is no longer present. It just doesn't exist in our overcleaned world, and C-sections and antibiotics. The infantis just isn't there anymore. So because of that, there's other bacteria that can get into baby's gut, and they colonize because they're opportunistic. And the good guy's not there, so the bad guys are going to take over. And because of that, then the inflammation goes up. So we have a paper that we show the pro-inflammatory cytokines, which are just markers of inflammation, were really elevated in these newborn babies that overall appeared quote unquote healthy, but they have these inflammatory markers that are linked to an increased risk of allergies and asthma, type 1 diabetes. With elevations in those cytokines, that's what creates that risk. By putting back what nature intended, so Evivo, which is the infantis, and partnering it with its food source, it crowds out all of those bad bacteria. They don't have a chance to get in the baby's gut. And so it lowers those markers of inflammation. So when baby's immune system is trying to learn what is good, what is bad, developing that immune system, it's actually able to develop in a state of low, almost no inflammation, which that's what we want. Because I like to say it's almost like without Evivo, it's like somebody pulled a fire alarm in like a giant concert, and there's just pure chaos, and nobody knows where the exit is, and there's no order. But if it's calm and everybody can get a single file, it's obviously goes much better. And there's no fire,
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I like how you said, if the good guys aren't there, the bad guys take over. Reminds me of like all of life, right? In a city. Yeah, that's the way our bodies work. Um, so in your work in the NICU, you obviously saw some babies. I don't know how common is it, NEC or necrotizing enterocolitis. First of all, how common is that?
I don't know the exact percentage, but it does happen. It's not that it's, every baby gets it. But when it happens, it's so nuts. You don't ever forget the babies that develop neck because it is so crazy. But I don't know the exact number.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I read one statistic that about a 50% death rate for yeah, it's just awful, just awful. And I'm been super interested in this strain for about 6 months. So I end up doing a lot of my own reading. It's not research, right? But a lot of reading, and saw that B. infantis supplementation does a really good job in preventing necrotizing enterocolitis for all the reasons you just described. So can you talk more about the benefit of EVC 001 for necrotizing enterocolitis?
So neck is one of those diseases that, like I said, it hits hard and it's fast and it's devastating. In a matter of hours, you can run into the OR with your baby, and it's very devastating. There's theories and papers studying what causes neck, and one of the biggest components or things rising to the top is an overgrowth of a bacteria called Probiotic, which is not a good bacteria that will then also increase inflammation. So I would assume the hypothesis by feeding the B. infantis, if you're lowering that inflammation and crowding out that bacteria, then it will not have those incidents.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. I want to say something else about it, but it lost me there. Your website, I saw on your website, it says that Evivo aims to unlock the full power of the gut microbiome and full potential of human nutrition to benefit health, which is a great phrase. Sounds sort of audacious, in some ways. So help us understand what that means.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have 3 kids. My first 2 kids, I thought I was doing everything perfectly right. Most moms do. We're going to breastfeed. We're going to eliminate as much as we possibly can and give these kids the best start. And we're taught that breast milk is the best food. So, I was fortunate enough to feed all 3 of my children breast milk, but because that bacterial strain is missing, you're not able to get the full benefit of breast milk. So breast milk has liquid gold. We love it. The third largest solid component of breast milk is something called human milk oligosaccharides. And there's actually more HMO in breast milk than protein. So we know how important protein is. And mom's milk is creating more HMOs, or more of those than protein. Those HMOs are completely undigestible by baby. So 15% of the solid component of mom's breast milk is literally traveling through baby and ending up in the diaper. And there's studies to show that. And it's because B. infantis is not there. So B. infantis is it will outcompete any other bacteria to consume those HMOs. So that's its favorite food. It does something unique. Most bacteria, when they go to consume a food source, will actually consume it outside of the bacterial cell. So they kind of pick it apart and break it down. And that it's like feeding fish. It allows a lot of fish to kind of eat the food. B. infantis is very selfish and so good at consuming all HMOs that it actually brings it inside of itself and consumes all of it. So it doesn't allow for any other food for potentially bad bacteria. By doing that, it takes these undigestible nutrients, the HMOs, and converts them into metabolites and short-chain fatty acids that actually can feed the colonocytes, so feed the lining of the intestines. And that mainly increases lactate and acetate. Those are the 2 short-chain fatty acids that it produces. That lowers baby's intestinal pH, and pathogenic bacteria cannot live in that lower pH environment. And so then it crowds them out, and B. infantis just grows and proliferates, and it continues this churning out of these amazing metabolites for baby. So by pairing Evivo with mom's breast milk, you're allowing that process to take place and really protect the gut on multiple layers. You protect the mucin layer that should be there. You lower the inflammation. You reduce the bacteria, reduce the pH. It's this whole amazing mechanism that just by pairing that bacteria with the right food source, that you're actually able to allow the gut and the immune system and that baby to develop.
You said, let me just review a couple of really important things there. Two main things. So, creating a hostile environment for the bad guys, simply stated. But you mentioned the colonocytes, and just for our listeners, if they're not familiar, it's a one layer cell thick of epithelial cells. And other than the mucin layer you mentioned, is the only thing that separates the internal contents of the colon from your bloodstream, which is what it helps to understand why this thing everyone calls a leaky gut happens so easily, so quickly, and how you get septic and even unfortunately leading to death on occasion. So it's doing both of those at the very least. At the very least, yeah,
Right.
that's super important.
Right. And I think it's with that understanding, that single layer and then this layer of mucus, bacteria that don't want to eat those HMOs that are in mom's breast milk, they need to eat something. And they will turn down and they will actually eat the mucus layer that protects those colonocytes. And so that's your body's first line of defense. And yet these bacteria that should be there, they're hungry, they're going to turn to something. So it's just this whole cascade of bad things happening, and yet you just put back what nature intended, and then everything goes back how it should be.
And most of the bad guys usually are gram-negative bacteria, and when they on their cell wall, produce what's called LPS, lipopolysaccharide, which then also attacks those colonocytes. So you say it's a terrible, terrible cascade. You talk about the wonders of HMO. We talked a little bit before this, but I'm a pastor, and last year sometime I get so excited about this sort of thing. And I can't help. I mean, my worldview comes from the Bible. I can't help but see a divine ordering from this. That, as you said, the third largest ingredient in breast milk is HMO, only for the baby's bacteria. Come on, that's divine design, in my opinion.
I definitely agree. And you can't make up science is perfect unless it was divinely appointed.
Yeah, awesome. I know that on your website, countless parents have stated their infants have showed really great improvements, similar to your own son after supplementing with Evivo. So, wondering how you receive all of those reports. Is there anything official? Are they anecdotal? How do you track those?
So there was a paper that was published in 2021, I believe, where we surveyed parents over a 2-year period and asked them questions. And we said, if your baby was gassy or fussy, did you notice a difference after starting this? If your baby had diaper rash, did you notice a difference? And sleep. Those were the 3 main things that we asked our consumers over a 2-year period. They reported a benefit or resolution of gas and fussiness, diaper rash, and sleep. So that's the most official thing that we have. Unofficially, I have been with this company, like I said, for almost 6 years now. I have spoken to providers across the United States. I've spoken to parents on the phone. I've talked to patient consultants, midwives, doulas, pediatricians. I mean, you name it, I've had personal conversations where just hearing testimonies of what they've gone through with their patient population. There was one in particular this was probably a year or so after I started. And there was a provider who had this big pediatric practice. They saw many newborns and they were perfect. Like, I want you to become a champion of Evivo because you made your recommendations to your patients. And they were just kind of like how I was. Like, it's just a probiotic. Like, it's good bacteria. They didn't really truly understand, despite many times not. So then I get a call, and this provider was saying that they had a baby that had severe diaper rash. I mean, excoriated. So this poor baby's backside is bleeding, and we can't get enough people. He said, I tried everything that I know in my arsenal. So fine, give me your probiotic. But you say it can help, let's put it to a test. So within 5 days of this baby starting on Evivo, it cleared everything up. I mean, it went from excoriated to perfect little lump. And this provider called me and was like, all right, I'm sold. I don't know what you gave me, but tell me everything again, because what did I give? It's just amazing because once it clicks and you see, and there's science behind that by actually going back to the diaper rash. The reason why the skin breaks down has to do, it's kind of counterintuitive, but it has to do with a high fecal pH. So you would think a more acidic pH of the stool would break down the skin, but it's actually that high fecal pH that actually activates an enzyme that will break down the skin barrier. So you put the infantis back, it does all those turning out of the beautiful lactate and acetate, lowers the fecal pH, keeps that enzyme at bay, and protects the skin barrier. So it's not just this anecdotal, I'm gonna throw spaghetti at the wall, let's give a stick. It's kind of what when I talk to these providers, that diaper rash, well, hey, there's science behind that. There's a reason why these babies have skin breakdown that has to do with their fecal pH, and we show you that. So that's where I think it gets really fun, is there's a lot of personalization, especially in the adulthood, with what strains of bacteria are going to work with your diet. But in infancy, you're meant to have one food source, ideally breast milk. And so when you put this back in, I don't want to say it's across the board because again, every baby's different, but the majority of the time, it lines up perfectly because you're putting back, I say this a million times a day, you're putting back what nature intended to be there. And it's just a beautiful picture after that.
Mm-hmm. I had never heard that about diaper rash. That by itself is worth the price of this podcast, I think.
Isn't it?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, counterintuitive. Your son you were talking about obviously was constipated. I'm familiar with a couple of infants that I quite familiar with their cases, and one of them had diarrhea, all the time. And you mentioned 4 or 5 days, noticing differences. Within 24 hours, his diarrhea was gone. Literally did not pass a stool for like 7 days, which apparently is still within normal range for, so I heard with this Evivo product.
Yep. And there's science behind that too, because those HMOs, when they're being stooled out, they have what's called a high osmolality, so they pull water with them. So if you don't have the infantis to consume those HMOs, they're literally ending up in the diaper and pulling water with them. So once the infantis starts consuming them, the baby holds on to water, and then the stools will actually reduce to about, the typical norm is about 1 to 2, kind of like a Play-Doh-like consistency. But every baby's different in how they stool. So some babies, parents will start to notice what their baby's normal is. So for my son, who's severely constipated, his normal became like every 3 to 4 days he would have a bowel movement. But we're talking better than screaming gas pains and constipation and cooking every 14 days. But that was his normal. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me because you're consuming what is pulling out water with it.
So even in the immediate sense, it seems to be solving constipation, diarrhea, diaper rash. What about eczema?
So eczema, we can't say that it cures eczema. I can tell you what people have told me about it. So eczema is usually the first sign of like an atopic march. It has to do with inflammation. So there could be a lot of other causes to eczema. This is why I don't want to say to every parent, if my baby has it, don't undo it, because there could be an actual milk protein allergy that could be causing it, because it's kind of a very broad symptom. But for babies who have that high inflammation, if that's their issue, they're not going to have a milk protein allergy, and you feed Evivo and you lower that inflammation, then your skin will come down too. So I've had parents report that definitely they've seen a resolution of that as well.
Yeah, wonderful. So we're talking about short-term, very quick changes, but also, and I know this is harder for anybody, let alone a parent of a child who is suffering at some point, the long-term things, to keep those in mind as well. We don't, you're holding your baby, don't think, will he or she have asthma, when they're 5 years old, but this also helps that.
Well, I mean, you don't have the data like 5 years out, but there's been an X amount reduction in those conditions. But if you look theoretically at across the literature, it's well documented that an increase in pro-inflammatory cytokines will lead you to a risk of asthma. you have that risk. You also have the genetic risk that can contribute to that. But if those cytokines that are increase the risk, my job, my goal would be to reduce those pro-inflammatory cytokines and show that you reduce those by being Evivo. So I think you never know what your child's path is going to look like. And I think as a parent, you want to do everything you can control to set them up for success. And this is a very simple thing that you can do from the beginning, knowing that, okay, I can control that inflammation that's happening with their gut and give them the best shot at success.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. You are the sales director, but I get the sense this is not like selling used cars, that you get great joy, great passion out of this.
It's funny because I had friends who told me like, oh, you need to get into sales. And I'm like, I don't want to sell. I can't sell water to a dying man. That doesn't interest me. But what does get me excited, as you can tell, is what God intended was this bacteria in food. And I love that because you're putting back what should be there. That's natural design. I love that it's historically relevant and geographically so relevant. It's not manufactured. This is everything. It's the simplest solution, and it's just because it's gone. It doesn't exist in our society. And so I love educating people on how less is more if you're set up the right way. And let's just set it up how we've been having babies for a long time. Babies have been in this world. And why is it now that we're suddenly seeing such an increase in all of these conditions? And there could be many hypotheses as to why, but to me, it just spoke to me that, I read a paper that was from early 1900s that was a scientist looking at the stools of breastfed infants. One, the pH was low, it was about 5 to 5.1, so it was a very low, more acidic pH. And they, under a microscope, I forget the author, but he referred to it as the bifidobacter. He said it almost looked like a monoculture, that this entire culture of the bacteria in a breastfed infant stool is this Y-shaped bacteria, which the infantis, that's why it's called the bifidobacterium, because it's got a bifurcated in it. We now know what he saw was the infantis. And that was in the early 1900s. And then all of a sudden, formula and antibiotics and all these things that are life-saving measures. We do need them in C-sections, but it's just been this slow generational eradication of this bifidobacter. And you can see across the literature the rise in the fecal pH going up to 66.5, they say is quote unquote normal, but it's not.
No.
And then you can look geographically. So if you look in underdeveloped nations like Bangladesh and Malawi and Kenya, in the Amazon, those babies still have that bifidobacter. They still have a predominantly being microbiome. And interestingly enough, not just in those underdeveloped nations, but the Old Order Mennonites outside of Rochester, New York, the Amish population, they still also have a high prevalence of being infantis in their community because they don't typically do antibiotics. They don't typically do C-sections. They live in a one-room dwelling a lot of the times. They have multiple kids and make their own food. So to me, that was like, we're not trying to sell a story. We're educating on the story, which I think is.
That's fascinating. I read that study on the Mennonite from New York, and if I recall, it's something like 400% more bifido than the other population, which is just astounding.
Yeah, I forget numbers, but it was a clear differentiation from population. The infantis present, yes. The Rochester, New York, not present, and it was looking at, I believe, autoimmune, or was it looking at asthma? It's looking at one of the allergic type things, but there was
Right.
And the babies that did not have infantis versus.
Yeah. Well, I don't want you to work any harder than you're working, or maybe we'll pick on your marketing department, but people have to know about this. Maybe this podcast will help in some way, because the couple infants I mentioned that I was familiar with, I'd never heard of, and I'd been studying gut health for a few years, never heard of this strain. obviously heard of Bifido and B infantis, but they found a baby microbiome specialist from Australia. So we had to go halfway around the world, and she's the one who prescribed the EVC001. And just so we're clear, we've been mentioning that, but that is the official name for that strain, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Right. So, yeah, and those two children that I've mentioned, remarkable changes. So, right before supplementation, the first infant had a total bifido of only 12%, and after your product rose to 81%, which, just again for our listeners, everything I've read, somewhere between 60 and 80% total bifido is ideal for infants. And then a second infant went from almost undetectable bifido to 63% bifido. And to me, the amazing thing, especially about the second infant, is they only had a single dose of your product. Now, that's probably not normal and maybe, completely out of the standard deviation of success. But I was stunned by those. And the first child only supplemented for 2 weeks. So wondering what the recommendation for supplementation is.
Yeah, it's a good question. So typically what I recommend, well, let me back up. If we think how nature, again, intended birth to happen, mom is supposed to have a low level of the infantis in her microbiome. Baby's supposed to be born vaginally. Nobody likes to talk about it, but mom passes the bowel movement during birth, delivery, and passes her microbiome, transfers her microbiome to baby, and then puts baby to breast. So I like to refer that as to seeding and feeding. So you seed the baby through the delivery process, and then you're feeding that microbiome through colostrum, which has a high abundance of HMO. So if you think of it that way, and if nature was perfect and you had the infantis in our population, that's how babies should get the infantis. That should be the first bacteria they should come in contact with, and then it competes and outgrows anything else that might be in the microbiome. Since that's not happening, we sell 1 month supply and 3 month supply. So I tell parents, and we also have a publication that was done, our initial publication that showed that after 3 weeks of supplementation, these babies also persisted and colonized as long as they breastfed. So what I tell parents is if baby is born vaginally, there's no antibiotics, there's no C-section, and baby is breastfed, then probably that 1 month is going to be sufficient. You look at your data, and you look at the publication that shows that should be sufficient. I don't know the environment that every baby's born in, so that should be, but if there's other potentially pathogenic bacteria they're exposed to, or if it's a situational thing, they might be able to supplementation. But theoretically, based on that should be enough. If a baby is born via C-section, has antibiotics, or mom has antibiotics, then I recommend that 3 month just to be sure, because the tiny health kits and all those gut health kits are amazing. And I wish that was standard of care, that every baby went home with one, and I wish that it was that everybody would do it, because it's so important to see what's happening with that. But right now, since it's not, a lot of parents don't have access to it or don't know about those kits. What I tell them, and there's a delay too, there's a 6 months delay. So I tell them, that 3 months is the first 100 days is when the baby's immune system is the critical time, critical window. You're going to know during those 3 months whether it persists and colonizes or not. You're giving the bacteria and its food, so then it can have those metabolites for those treatments. And then I say, if the baby has to go on antibiotics for whatever reason, her mom does, and she's still breastfeeding, then you might want to have some on hand just to kind of start back up again to rebound back the bacteria. So I guess it kind of.
Yeah, that's helpful. In many ways, your product is too good. As you say, it seeds the gut, and it stays there. So you're selling a product that, under best circumstances, you only need for a certain amount of time, instead of, subscribing to it for life, which is good for the consumer. But I think what needs to happen is get this in every single home. You know, that's how you increase your sales.
I always tell, whoever I'm talking to, and if there's somebody within my company who's either listening to this or in the room, I always say take earmuffs, because really our goal, like you said, is to get this information out there and put us out of business. Because if you get this back in the population, like you said, if every household has it, it's gonna start to be part of our environment again. Then moms are gonna have it and be able to do the transfer at work. So yeah, eventually we should go out of business if we get this out there enough. But right now, the only way to truly get it to baby is to give it to people. So yes.
Yeah. You mentioned C-section antibiotics as the killers of the good guys. And both these infants that I'm referring to, first one had C-section, then of course antibiotics for mom and the baby. And the second one was normal delivery, but some antibiotics for the baby. And I'm certain that's what did it. Also on, I'm a big fan, you're talking about HMO, but for adult supplementation, Layer Origins HMO product powder. And so I create some video content for them. Just posted one a few days ago, a video of these two infants and actually myself that I'll talk about in a little bit. And you see this inverse relationship like this, inverse relationship between, in both cases, the bad guy was Bacteroides fragilis, which in small amounts, can be beneficial actually for infants, but we're talking 40 to 60% of their gut had this B fragilis. And literally the bifido goes up and the B fragilis goes down, and they just move in tandem. As long as bifido is going up, the B fragilis is going down. Just a stunning visualization of exactly what we've been talking about.
That's amazing. And I think when I listened to one of yours, and correct me if I'm wrong, but B fragilis, that also consumes vision. Is that correct or no?
Yeah, right. That's another quick fascinating thing. One study I read, in vitro, so in the lab, B fragilis actually outconsumed B infantis, the HMOs, just by a slight margin. But of course, when you put the two in the gut together, as you explained early on, the lactic acid, lower pH, B infantis will win every time.
Right.
So
Well, that's funny because, like you said, it was an inverse relationship. So you've got another HMO consumer that's running free, and I can consume as much of this as I want. But then you get the champion colonizer in there being fantasy. It's like, nope, no soup for you. It's mine. So that's fun.
that's actually a great point. Yeah, they're competing for the same real estate, the same resources, and still the good guy wins. Yeah, that's fascinating. I was going to say something else about come back to me here. Uh, Mind is all over the place. You mentioned Tiny Health, which for our listeners is in the last few years, a gut testing company. And just a few weeks ago, as a matter of fact, you and I were going to record this a month ago, but I said, hey, can we wait? Because Tiny Health is just about to change their way they detect bacteria, and they should be able to see EVC 001 in the stool sample. And they're able to go back and look at prior samples, because the data were actually embedded in there as a way of actually seeing the data, honestly. So I wanted to wait until we got those results. And in both infants that I've been talking about, they found EVC 001. And it was, it's hard to know exactly because both infants had 4 different strains of B infantis. But collectively, the B infantis, and one of those obviously was EVC 001. Collectively, the B infantis was 90 to 95% of their total bifido. So I tend to think it's almost all the EVC 001 because they supplemented with it, et cetera. And then I also found it in my own gut again, which I'll talk about this a little bit in a moment. But with that new capability for Tiny Health of doing the testing and your product, how might that change and help Evivo?
Yeah. I mean, super exciting that this is happening. For us, it's kind of like, yeah, well, we knew it was going to be there because we got the science to back up how well EPC 001 grows. But I think from a parent, and consumer's perspective, if you're going to be spending money on something that you're hoping that's going to change your child's gut, have all these benefits that are, published and whatnot through EBC001, you want to make sure that it's getting into your baby and that it's going to be there. And so I think it's amazing. It's going to offer reassurance to parents, like, yes, I gave the right product. Yes, I did this. More than that, so one of the things that makes EBC001 stand out from other commercially available infantises has to do with the genetic completeness of that strain. So each infantis has 5 genetic cassettes, I guess is the best way to describe it. We call them H1 through H5. H5, so EBC001 is one of the only commercially available infantises that has the H5 gene cluster. And what that does, it's like the Velcro that takes the HMOs inside. So remember how I said other bacteria would eat outside of itself, and then potentially allow straps for other bacteria. With that H5 cluster that EBC001 has, it brings it inside itself. So it doesn't allow those HMOs to be consumed, like we said, Fragilis or anything else that might want an HMO. So I think down the line, if a family is giving 2 different strains of, and I can't think of the other infantis strains that are available in other probiotics for babies. But let's say, I'm going to double up, and then you come to find out that EBC001 is the dominant one. Well, that makes sense because it can actually outcompete the other ones because think of like a pie eating contest. It's getting it all in faster, So I think that's really, again, from consumer, you want to make sure what you're giving is growing so it can do what you think it's going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. I think you said earlier, it literally is able, there's something like 200 different HMOs in breast milk, and it's able to consume all of them. And a study I read said that children supplementing, and I don't recall if it was specifically EBC001 or B. infantis, but without naming a strain, there was no detectable HMO in the stool sample. So it was gone. It was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. See, this is, exciting stuff. In general, have not been a fan of probiotics, which is kind of funny because I'm such a huge fan of EBC001. And just this is before I was testing my gut ever. And I just never noticed any changes. I don't know what was going on in my gut per se, but it was no benefit to me. But I found a lot of benefit from supplementing with things like HMO powder and some other soluble fibers. Wondering, I think we already talked about all the benefits of HMOs here, so I'm going to move on here. We're talking about a lot of studies, and are any of those studies, or how many studies that you're familiar with, are specifically targeted at the EBC001 strain?
I tried to count how many. I think we have a total of 17 publications. And the ones that I say that we did in the beginning, like the initial ones from UC Davis, where they discovered HMOs and EBC001 and they put them together. Those are the most, to me, storytelling pieces that we have as far as the mechanism of action and why this works. So that we have the persistence and colonization that talks about supplementing for 3 weeks and it persisted in colonize, which isn't typically shown in any probiotic. Usually there's a washout period. So that was a novel discovery. The lowering of the pH, there's a reduction of antibiotic resistance genes, a reduction in virulence factors, the mucin layers intact, inflammatory markers. There's so many. And when I initially came on, I first read that study when that father told me about Evivo, and then I got bombarded with some light reading, but I like light reading. And I was just fascinating because in my mind, I'm thinking it's a sales role and things like that. It's like the OxyClean diet. It's like, but wait, there's more. And it's like the next paper, you're like, oh my gosh, it's just solid science of this mechanism of action. And like you mentioned, when people are like, okay, for an adult, what do I take? And it's like, well, I don't know, everyone has a different diet. So everyone's exposed to different things. Everyone has a different history of X amount of years before you start taking probiotics. So you can't have the same broad statements as you can with an infant who's straight from mom and just exposed into this world that's meant to have that food source. So uh, it's it's hard because, you know, for an adult, we don't see the benefits, so then we think, okay, well, maybe it doesn't do anything, but we might not be feeding the strains that we're taking the right foods that they need, so it's not going to confer a benefit. So, like I said, it's not just good bacteria. There's so much that goes into it.
Mm-hmm. And if listeners wanted to take a look at those research papers, just go to PubMed and type in EVC001, probably the easiest way.
I'll pop up, yeah.
Read to their heart's content. Yeah. There are some folks using EVC001 in a way that you may not be familiar with. I'm part of this 14,000 member gut health club group on Facebook. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I believe you told me about it, but I never went on. I'm not a big Facebook person, so
Oh, sure.
So yeah.
Yeah, it might be something to check out, your company and see, because people talk about their, really struggles all the time. But there's a group on there that started a couple years ago making Bifido yogurt, which is a little harder than regular yogurt. I make standard yogurt, and it's so easy. 12 hours, you have a perfect batch every time. But Bifido is a lot trickier to grow correctly and not get contaminated. But they, at least one that I know, perhaps more, have started using EVC001 as their starter. So they're literally making yogurt out of your probiotic.
Perfect. I mean, if you're gonna choose the infantis, choose the best one, right?
Absolutely.
Anything about making yogurt, so that's how that goes. That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, and one gentleman who I know for a fact is doing it is like really particular and science based. So when he gets results, you can trust them. So I think that'll be exciting to see what he comes up with.
I was gonna say, is he noticing anything, or are any of these the infantis yogurts, are they reporting any benefit that they're noticing?
Um, the Bifido yogurts, many have benefited and seen their Bifido rise, but I don't know if he's been doing the EVC001 very long at all to know that. But yeah, it'll be exciting to hear what comes of it. Yeah, especially because the group is called Gut Test Club, so it's all about most of these people on there are doing some sort of testing, so they're not just talking about symptoms usually, but the actual tests and results. So talking about these infants and how well they did, and being sort of a gut health nerd, I was trying to raise my Bifido a few years ago. It went up to 8.5%, which is like, for talking about infants, 60 to 80%. 8% for an adult is like crazy high. I think the typical is less than 0.5%. So I was happy about that. Oddly enough, and I'm not sure why, when I took Bifido yogurt, it crashed my Bifido. So something happened there. So anyway, I went down to almost no Bifido, and I was sad about that. But I find that when I have mild asthma, and if I get some Bifido, it takes away almost all my asthma. So even as an adult, that's I think really important. So I decided to try this myself, the EVC001. And honestly, I delayed for a little bit because it was so successful in the infants. I didn't want it to completely overtake my whole gut and ruin my diversity and so forth. So I was like, this is like playing with a nuclear weapon. But I finally bit the bullet, and I took so the same little sachets, for infants, but I would take 2 a day for 7.5 days. I doubled up on actually I took 4 doses of HMO during that time, and ended up with 2% bifido, and they were able to see if to see the EVC. Sorry, that's not accurate. Let me get this straight. They weren't able to see the EVC 001 strain because my total B. infantis was at 0.6%. And at this point, anything below 1% is not reliably detected. But, you know, how else would I have B. infantis in my gut other than when I supplemented with that? So I'm really happy about that. And also, so 0.6% B. infantis, it seemed to ignite my other bifido, which rose to a total of 2%. So there's a symbiotic, you know, synergistic relationship happening there. So I'm really happy about that. And I'm guessing that it, and I won't be testing for a few months, but it'll persist, perhaps even grow. But wondering, do you think I'm the first test subject, adult test subject?
Well, there was actually a paper that was published in 2021. That was a proof of concept paper that showed that feeding the infantis partnered with HMOs, and then it was able to show engraft in the patients that had both HMOs. And I think on average, patients that were engrafted, their total bif or their B. infantis rose to 5%. I believe right on that. So that paper was really exciting. The implications and where they're going to go with that, or what we could do with that information, I'm not. I like babies. I know the infants. With adults, I feel like there's so many different ways that we could go. Excuse me, but it's amazing because, again, most probiotics will not persist in colonies.
Right. Do you recall how long they supplemented for in that study?
I have to go back and look.
Sure, sure. Do you happen to recall how they tested the gut? How they what test they used to detect that?
I think it was no, I don't.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. So I'm not the first, but I know I was the first with Tiny Health because they couldn't detect it before. So that was sort of fun. Some folks on that same Facebook group, people from all over the world. And it seemed like at this point, your product is not available outside of the US. Is that correct?
We don't ship internationally. That is correct.
Okay.
But we have had people report to us that by using like a carrier service, that they could go through that carrier service who can order it from us and ship it to them. However, they get it out there. So there is a way. You just have to use a different service. I think there's Dubai maybe is one I've heard of, and then GoSucks I think is the other one that I know. But I know that there's different companies that can order for you internationally.
Yeah. Do you think maybe that's really helpful information? That alternate shipping method might be some. Are you allowed to put that on your website, that sort of thing, so people could purchase it?
Question I'll have to ask because we do our customer service does get inquiries and stuff, and we try to direct them. We can't say go through this particular company. So
I gotcha.
We only find out about this from people who are like, hey, I ordered it. It's literally got one time. It's like, how did you get this? Like I reached out to them because I didn't know. One of the big challenges that we used to have was it used to need to be stored frozen and be cold stored. And so that created a shipping nightmare because
Sure.
the ice packs melt and then you have to get carriers and things like that. But now we changed our packaging so that it is shelf stable. So it no longer needs to be frozen. So the product can be stable at room temperature for 20 months past the date of manufacturing. So that should help with the shipping of all of this. It's depending on what the temperatures are.
Yeah. So is it just a general, is it not FDA, but some rule that you can't ship overseas or something, or?
I believe it has to do with like customs and
Customs.
the health departments of different countries. They all have different stipulations of what they'll allow.
Of what's coming in. Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, that makes sense. So I picture, as good as this product is, in my mind's eye, I have pictured couple of mad scientists. So how do we get this product? A couple of mad scientists in the in a laboratory. They've got white coats on, and they use the power of lightning, like Frankenstein, and then they create it and they laugh maniacally. Is that how is this been bioengineered?
No, it has not.
No.
Other
Okay.
thing that really spoke to me back in the beginning, because I don't, again, I think less is more. No, the EBC001 was isolated from a healthy breastfed. So, I mean, you may call them mad scientists or you can call them geniuses over at UC Davis. Some of the most amazing minds ever. And it was learning about breast milk and those HMOs being undigestible. They said that it has to be a prebiotic for the good bacteria. So they tried to all this different strains of good bacteria that we know of. When they isolated the infantis and they put it on a plate of HMOs, they said that they've never seen anything grow so prolifically and profoundly before. So that's when they were like, wait a minute, we're on something, because normally you can, well, actually, I don't want to speak to normal probiotic development. I don't know about that. But I do know with being EBC001 on HMOs, it grew like crazy. And that's when they're like, okay, well, we have this strain that we isolated for the breastfed infant. Let's replicate it and see if we can commercialize it and put it back in a baby's gut and see what it does. And then that's when just the cascade of OxyClean, but wait, there's more, there are all these benefits. So super exciting.
So really sort of, I don't want to say by accident, but they're probably isolating a lot of bacteria. Then they just found this one that really would consume the HMOs.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe they were able to look at stools from in those underdeveloped countries to see what
Ah,
these look like. Those babies who weren't exposed to C-sections, antibiotics, and formula feeding. And that's when they saw the bean mantis. And so they're like, okay, well, maybe this is what is naturally meant to be there. Let's isolate it and see what happens. And then here we are.
yeah. Good gardeners are familiar with heirloom seeds, right? Sort of ancient seeds that have been passed down before GMOs and all glyphosate, all these sorts of things. So sounds like sort of an heirloom bacteria.
Yeah, it does.
What was found. Yeah. So then was UC Davis involved in the formation of Evivo in any way, or they just partnered?
So we were a spin out from the Foods for Health Institute there. So I believe one of the scientists came and she helped found the company, and then they commercialized it and became the product. And fast forward X amount of years, and here we are.
Yeah, wonderful. So, Carrie, this has been really fun and helpful. Just wondering, we've covered so many topics. Was there anything else that maybe we didn't cover that you'd like to make sure that we know?
I feel like we've covered so many topics. I feel like we've done a good job. I mean, I think the takeaway is the right food, the right strain of bacteria at the right time. And so, I mean, you mentioned you took it and it increased your grip and things like that. And we hopefully there can be more studies done to see what this will do in the adult population. But for those infants, you have to go back to how nature intended what was supposed to happen. It's supposed to be the first bacteria they come in contact with. You feed it with breast milk, and then it just sets up success. And so, my hope is, yes, get this out to as many people as we can and get so many babies on it to limit those symptomatic things in the beginning, so colic and gas and fussiness and diaper rash and all those things that moms go crazy about. And then ultimately put me out of business. Put us out of business. Let me get it out there.
Quit saying that. Quit saying that. Yeah, no, that's it makes sense. That's an admirable goal. And just so our listeners understand clearly, that is that if you're taking your product and taking a standard formula that doesn't have HMO, it's not going to work because it doesn't have the food source.
So we do have anecdotal reports from formula fed babies where parents will say, you know, I started this because my child was fussy or my child had diaper rash. And they do report a resolution of symptoms. We don't have the data to say not necessarily why. The best thing that we can describe it as is the infantis can consume other sugar sources as well. So just like other bacteria in baby's gut that could be pathogenic bacteria, if it's getting these HMOs from breast milk, other bacteria can try to break those down and consume them and cross-feed each other and just have a messy field day. The infantis or EDC001 in formula can also consume some of the sugars. And if you're feeding it every day and it's consuming some of those sugars, you could have some of those metabolite functions happen. We don't have the data to say you have to feed for X amount of days, or this is how much reduction of anything like that. For me, I would just, when you're looking at what is available for probiotics, I'm a skeptic. I don't necessarily believe a lot of marketing claims that a lot of probiotics make because there's not that regulation on it. We have gone through every testing we possibly can. You can be assured that you are giving the infantis to your baby who is a beneficial bacteria. There's no other bacteria in there. So if you're going to give something, I would give the highest quality probiotic that you can possibly get for this one.
Yeah, sorry.
We have ones of them too. So I would, you can get that. Formulas are starting to try to mimic. They've always tried to mimic breast milk, but there are formulas that do have HMOs.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And fascinating. I wasn't even thinking the possibility of cross feeding, of course, consuming other things. So even if it's smaller amount, there is enough to change some symptoms that the parents are noticing.
Hopefully that's what they tell us.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't go fishing for this information. They just report, my baby's from my bed and I started for X, Y, and Z, and it's not better. It's like, all right, cool, we'll take it.
Yeah. That wouldn't make for a great study to give infants or children your product and no HMO. It sort of seems cruel, but but it would be interesting to have that data, as you say.
Oh yeah, for sure. If I had my way, I'd just do all research studies and possibly, because again, that's just how my mind works. You show me the evidence. So I wish I could give you all those studies.
Yeah, I'm so with you. Yeah, I'm so skeptical, but can be convinced of, by good studies. You mentioned, marketing of probiotics. When you go, you see this just in the last couple of years, even you go to the supermarket, you go to the pharmacies, and the probiotic section is growing rampantly, and all these gummies and junk and oh, what a waste.
Oh, I mean, with my son, I would be up in the middle of the night, he's screaming at me, or finally quiet, and I can't move, and I'm Googling on my phone, and I'm like, there are so many options. And as a new mom who had a symptomatic, crazy, colicky, constipated baby, I'm desperate. But then your mind starts to spin because you're sleep deprived and not thinking clearly, and then you're trying things that are out there. I mean, I don't know how much money was spent on gadgets and red water and probiotics and all the things to try to solve these problems. And then come to find out, it's almost like a free-for-all in the probiotic space, because it's this black hole of regulation. And so people can get away with things, which is really disheartening to me. And it's sad for us to be lumped amongst all of those, because it's really truly the one strain that you need at this one time. Introduce table foods, and then you can go on your multi-strain. But in the beginning, start with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it might be a good final message to consumers to say that clearly you can buy a whole lot of different probiotics for years and years and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars, endless money, or buy your product for a limited amount of time and have untold benefits compared to the others.
Exactly. Start the right way and hopefully continue on that path. Do the best that you can when it's quote unquote easy in the newborn stage.
Right. Yeah. Well, perfect summary. Yeah. Thank you for that. Well, Carrie, thanks so much for your time. I know you've got a lot of sales calls to make, a lot of doulas to talk to, so we'll let you go, but thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you. This has been amazing. I can't wait to continue our conversations.
All right. All right. Take care.